All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. One of the things I think regular listeners to the show know is that I obviously the show is focused on Manitoba musicians, but there's also a category that I sort of like to call Manitoba adjacent, and it's people who either have a connection to the province, are from here, maybe they moved away, maybe something else happened, and it's often a way to sort of get to talk to more people than are just the ones in the Winnipeg music scene, because there's a lot going on. A lot of people from this part of the country have moved to other places and spread sort of Manitoba music out in different directions. And I think that's sort of what we're dealing with here with the guest on this episode. So I think the best way to start this off is if you want to just introduce yourself and give a bit of background about what you do, and then we'll start talking about your new record.
Sure, sounds great. So my name is Claire Morrison. I'm a folk and sort of folk adjacent singer-songwriter and artist based in Montreal, but from Winnipeg originally, and really started my career in Winnipeg. So played for a number of years there before moving to Montreal in 2013. And I also have a group that is based halfway between Montreal and Winnipeg called Fire and Smoke with Daniel Péloquin-Hoffner, who you may know. So
I do, yeah. He's
that's a
been on the
little bit
show
about.
before, yeah, yeah.
Oh, there you go. Awesome. Yeah, perfect.
Cool. So yeah, so you obviously have you have roots here and you have ties to here as well. So you fit. I mean, it's my show. I can pretty much interview whoever I want, but I like to have
Yeah,
it
you can do
make
what you want.
I like to make it fit in the Manitoba category. But you definitely qualify. So like you said, you moved to Montreal and that's been more than a decade ago now. So what I guess just to start off with, what are the differences in terms of the music scene that you've noticed, being there compared to here? Because I'm so mired in Winnipeg and Manitoba music that like anything outside of it is an alien universe to me. So, what kind of what are the differences between the two scenes?
Sure. I mean, one thing actually that I talk about quite a lot in, being here actually and being asked that question from the other angle of like people here being like, oh, what was it like growing up in Winnipeg? What was it
Yeah,
like starting your career there? And I often say that, in so many ways, I was really lucky to start in Winnipeg, just because it makes for a scene where you're so well supported, both officially and sort of like socially, from a community standpoint. But in Manitoba, we do have structures in place like Manitoba Music, like MFM, like Le Sans Nom, that are not structures that are sort of that they don't exist in the same way here. So that's one really notable difference. I mean, I think it sort of speaks to the quality of the Winnipeg music scene, actually, that I made this record between the two cities, because I didn't want to have to choose. But, I mean, in Montreal, it's interesting. Like, every city has its pros and cons. I think that what is so amazing here is just, the sheer number of people who are making music, the sheer, a friend of mine actually, who's also an artist from Belgium, he says that like what's amazing to him in Montreal every time is, everyone you talk to is an artist.
sure, sure.
And I
That's
think
nice to have.
and I
Yeah,
think, yeah, and I think that that's true, whether it's people who are working in music or they're working in other disciplines, they're working in dance, they're working in visual art, they're working in cinema. Cinema is really big here. There is just that sense of like everyone is sort of contributing to the creative effort, the sort of that has that creative impulse.
yeah. That's a cool play. It's a cool environment to be in for sure. Especially if you're creating yourself, you're going to be influenced whether you mean to or not by sort of being surrounded by all that, right?
100%.
So, not to dwell too much on the difference between the two cities, but I mean, you're coming from Winnipeg. This is a city that loves folk music. I mean, there's a very, very strong, supportive, deep history with folk and all of the umbrella genres that come out from that. Um, is there a similar love for that stuff out in Montreal? Like, I mean, is it a big genre, or is it maybe not as prominent as it is over here?
Yeah, so that's quite a significant difference, actually, is like, when I first moved here in 2013, and even when I started spending more time here, like in 2012, 2011, like the idea of what folk music is, or sort of like any of the references that we would kind of take for granted, coming from Manitoba or coming from the prairie provinces, are not necessarily artists that are really known well or at all here. So, even now, like folk music, you can tell that it sort of has a different definition here. Like with my project Fire and Smoke, like we would never call ourselves country. Like we would never say that we make
Sure.
country music. However, in order for our genre to be understood in the Quebec market, we do say that we're country because that's what we get called here.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
That's interesting.
so the comprehension around like anything that's sort of like folk or roots related, or like, somewhere in the constellation of those styles, there's just not as much of a history here
Okay.
with regards to those styles. And so I think that there is sort of some there are some big differences, or maybe there's some catch up that has to sort of happen around like what those kinds of music mean. And it's interesting because those are, types of music that have just been so listened to and well loved in other parts of Canada, that is a significant difference here for
Okay.
sure.
So I guess the reason we're talking today is because you have this new record, and this came out at the time we're recording just a few days ago. Um, I see you're calling it your debut album on the press materials that come with this, but I feel like you put stuff out before, right? I think I have an EP maybe that you did many years ago in Winnipeg, and so you've recorded your music is out there, but what's the difference with this one? I guess why is this sort of the debut? Because you've been making music for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, sort of the decision to use that language around it is, to sort of underline the fact that it is my first full length record. Like it is my first of any of my projects, actually. Like with Fire and Smoke, the EP that we put out last year. Now because albums are getting shorter and shorter, for some people that is considered an album at 6 tracks. But with regards to my project, I had put out an EP in 2013 called "Here's to You, Here's to Me,"
That's the one I'm thinking
and
of. Yeah,
then.
yeah.
Yeah, and then in 2020, I think it was, I released a couple of singles that I called the Lucky Light Sessions. So there was a version of You Are Light that was released as a single, and a song called Hands Up. And those were sort of acoustic, introductions to kind of like where my songwriting was going, and what was gonna, what maybe to expect on a sort of more fleshed out recording eventually.
Okay.
But in terms of a full length record, this is my very, very first one.
Cool. And so, I mean, you said earlier that you made this sort of between the two cities. How does that work? Because I mean, I know obviously the way people not only consume music but make music these days is very different. I mean, it's not even 10 years ago. It was a pretty different process. How did that? What is the process of making a record between two cities? Is it certain songs in one place, certain in the other place, or are you bouncing tracks back and forth with different other musicians, or how does it work?
Totally. It was crazy. It was like I really stand by that choice. I really stand by that decision that we made. But it is truly like the most difficult and complicated way to make a record. Because in most cases, like as you mentioned, like we recorded between Winnipeg and Montreal, and even then, it meant that we had sort of like two studios that we were primarily working out of. So, with Winnipeg, we worked mostly at No Fun Club.
Okay.
Here we worked, at a couple of different studios, including Studio Malamute. But it just meant that even from a file management perspective, it meant, separate hard drives and backups from this, and backing up every session, and making, and making sure that everyone has all the right stems that they're supposed to have. And the team is gargantuan on this record. Especially when you compare with things where, you've got your sort of core band of like maybe 3 or 4 people, and you record the whole record with that same group.
Yeah. Yeah.
On my record, including mix and mastering, there's 15 people.
Wow.
So just logistically, it was a big, big, big task. It was really worth it. I'm really happy that I did it that way. But we also did this, as I was living in Montreal full time. My producer, Rihanna, lives in Winnipeg, and we also made most of this record like in the depths of a pandemic.
Sure.
Um,
Great time to make a record, right? Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because I had taken a number of years kind of off for performing with my project, and then in 2019, I sort of came back to it and was getting ready to sort of, relaunch the project, or sort of get back into dedicating more time to it. And I did a couple
Okay.
shows at the end of 2019, and then the pandemic hit, and I thought, okay, well, what do we do? So, we made this record.
Cool, cool. And I mean, it's funny you mentioned the amount of people involved, because I think when on the surface people hear it's a folk record and they think, oh, this is going to be someone with an acoustic guitar and a microphone and that's it, right? But obviously this is much more involved. And then kind of an offshoot of that is, do you still think of it as a folk record? Because there's a lot going on. Folk is definitely, a primary driver of the sound, but there's a lot of other things happening. Like it's not strictly, I think, what people might expect from folk as a genre.
Yeah, 100%. I think this record, I mean, the way that I sort of conceive of it, if I have to give an elevator pitch, is that it's really sort of at the intersection of, acoustic singer-songwriter, indie alternative, and alt rock. Like there is a certain rock dimension to this album. And,
Yeah.
when I think of a lot of the people that are sort of influencing the choices that we made and the sounds that we went after, I'm thinking about people like Alanis Morissette. I'm thinking about people like Sheryl Crow. who are, I think who are artists that have a folk dimension,
Sure they do, yeah.
um, but that also have this, something that's quite a lot more fleshed out and a lot grittier. So, I think it's all of those things all at once, but certainly because of, my background and the way that I write songs and the importance of the lyrics, especially in all of that, I do still consider it a folk record, but with as many paintbrushes and different colors as I wanted to paint with when we made it.
Sure, for sure. So with those songs that are, I mean, I don't think heavier is the right word, but they're more rock oriented songs. Those songs that have that extra kind of extra gear. Is there a different process for writing those? I mean, I'm assuming you write these in a fairly stripped down mode, and then they get fleshed out and developed into what they are. Do you have to use a different piece of your brain to sort of get that concept going, or does it just naturally sort of evolve on its own?
That's interesting. I think because as you say, like that's that's a good guess. Like I do generally when I'm writing, it's always sort of guitar voice
Sure.
first. And that's sort of the test of the songs as well as like, well, okay, like do these hold up if it's just me and my guitar? Like are
Yeah.
the, that's sort of the measure that I'm using. But for all of the sort of like more rock oriented stuff, and I would even say that some of it's like is heavier and some of it is sort of like moodier in that way. That's
Some
almost
of it's
like
dark for sure. Yeah, like it has a
you're
dark
almost
tone tonally. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, you're almost going into like, some things that are even like sort of like prog rock, like almost like, I hear there's certain colors of like things like Deftones that I hear, but these are all things that I like to listen to. And I
Right.
think those all come into the record, on tracks like we used to do, for example. It's quite dark. But I think that's what's been so fun about working with my producer is that we've known each other for such a long time and we're such like artistic kindred, like we really understand each other and so much of like what we know how to do when we work together is not even really like spoken.
Okay. Well, that's good to have.
There's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. It's like, having that sort of unspoken understanding of, oh yeah, yeah, I know where you want to go and I know what you want this to be like. And I think, having such a synth heavy record, like there's lots and lots of synths on the record on almost every song in one way or another. And having obviously like, these like massive drums. Those are things that, really, really contribute to having those songs like sort of take on the color and the contours that they have.
For sure. Yeah. And that's interesting. You mentioned the two of you working together because I think that on the surface, both of you make very different music, but in this kind of on this record, a lot of it makes sense. You can kind of see where some of the influences from each other would blend in together, and with the synth, with some of those heavier parts. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Mhm.
What do you now that this is out? I mean, we're past the pandemic. Hopefully, that doesn't come back. Shows can happen, tours can happen. Everything's gotten back to some semblance of normality over the past couple of years. What is the next step now? Now that you have this out, I mean, are you? I ask a lot of people this question, and it's I know it's a hard one to answer, but in a world where everyone is releasing music 24 hours a day, there's constantly new albums being put up on Bandcamp or Spotify or whatever. How do you get yourself heard now? I mean, in 2025, how do you find your people who are gonna appreciate your record?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if there's an answer either. It's like a really hard question, but
yeah, totally with Herculean effort. I mean, I think part of this, and like I'm gonna kind of put on my boring like manager hat for
go
a
for it.
second because
Yeah,
I worked in artist management for many years, and so I really am concretely thinking about this question all the time,
okay,
especially with my record being an independent release and doing it without a label and all these things. I find that like this is such an annoying answer, but everyone has to kind of figure out the recipe that works for them. And like I find that super annoying when, when people say it, when I hear it in interviews, but it is true in the sense that like, I could sink, I don't know, I could sink $2,000 into a PR campaign, and if it's with the wrong person who doesn't have the network,
nothing happens.
um,
Yeah,
nothing happens, but but you're $2,000 lighter than you were when you started. So, I think that I tried to ask myself a lot of questions about like, okay, like, where are the people I want to reach? And do I know them or do I know their friends? Or how many sort of like entry points can I find to sort of access the people who I really think are going to find this record, meaningful to them. I
sure.
think that's a really important question is like, is this going to be not just something that they kind of throw on as background music, but is this something that's going to, become an important piece of music for them? Those are the people that I'm trying to reach. So that's what I'm thinking about a lot.
Well, I think that's a good way of approaching it. But what is it? Do you have an idea of how you find those people now? Because I mean, that's you've determined you figured out who you want to hear the record, right? And, and again, I'm not trying to like get you to reveal your whole marketing strategy or anything,
No,
but
it's okay.
it's just it's a common thing that comes up is people they make great music, put it out in the world, and then often it just fizzles because they haven't found who needs to hear it. And I mean, I know you've been doing this for long enough that you've built an audience. People know who you are in the scenes that you perform in and that you play
Mm-hmm.
in. But yeah, it's just, do you have any sort of well, I guess what's the plan to move this record forward now that it's out in the world?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I am doing, from just in a concrete sort of way, like, talking to lots of media, doing the PR mail outs, doing the sort of like
Yeah,
the sort of, it's really like, uh, it's sort of funny. I saw Noah Dirksen briefly, another Winnipeg musician yesterday, and we were talking about sort of all the stuff that has to happen now, and he was like, "Oh yeah, the thankless work." Of emailing radio stations, hoping that like 5 out of 10 of them are gonna try it out or are gonna open your email, these kinds of things. But it's just as much as possible, like sending it out while it's new.
yeah, yeah,
Sending it out while it's new. I think that, another sort of just from a strategic standpoint, and this is something that I'm not crazy about, not because I don't like this aspect of the work, but because it's just not really where I like to spend most of my time. But the visual identity of your project is so important now in a way that it wasn't, 10 years ago. Like you said, like so much has changed. So making sure that I'm like putting things out on the internet that I'm actually excited about and want to look at and think
yeah.
that is going to be interesting to other people, all that stuff. So it's all of those things together and trying to sort of see like where do you get a good reaction
It's
and
interesting you
and
mentioned.
well,
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
that's okay.
the visual side of things is interesting because we're in an era now where a lot of people, the album cover traditionally is not necessarily something someone's going to look at if they're listening on a streaming service, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's easy, I think, to think that the visual part doesn't matter, but obviously it does, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you're attracting people online, and they need to see something that pulls them in before they hit play on the recording.
100%. Yeah, it's really like that's the inciting element.
Yeah,
Is like, oh, what's that? You know?
and then hopefully when they click the play button, they like what it is.
Exactly. Yeah, so it has to be that it's so interesting too, like just thinking about that. Like, does my record cover look like my music?
Sure, yeah, yeah,
Because sometimes you see something and you think you're going to like it, and you go in and it's totally not what you thought it was. So there's a danger there too. But and I think too, like, this is not so much, a response to your question as much as it is like an offshoot from it. But
okay,
I think too that, like, we're thinking so much about like, what can we do and what can we do and where can we push harder and where can we put more effort. And I think the thing too for like lifelong health and happiness is also to sort of decide for yourself, like, where's the limit?
sure,
Because there's always something that you can be doing. There's always something more that you could have done that and that is a recipe for being deeply unhappy as an artist, especially in sort of the current, state of affairs. So I think too, it's sort of like, for example, for myself, in the last couple of years, people have been really, really sort of like harping on the importance of music videos, for
yeah,
example, even though from my perspective, no one watches a music video anymore. So we're sinking vast amounts of money into these things that are used to be, essentially to be chopped up to make 15-second reels.
for sure.
So I make the reels. I do that thing, but I don't make the $50,000 music video that goes with it, because that's a limit for me at this time, and I just don't think that it's useful.
That makes a lot of
Um,
sense.
yeah, so it's also finding like where your enthusiastic yeses are, but also where your enthusiastic nos are.
Definitely, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that definitely makes sense. You mentioned a few minutes ago about a lot of this was sort of pre-pandemic, and the pandemic happened, and then as everyone knows, everything kind of went to shit. So with songs that have roots going back a few years, how do you feel about these songs now? Obviously, you're happy to get them out. You're happy for people to hear them. But do you feel that you have changed stylistically or anything since then? Because I'm sure you've been writing new music beyond these recordings, and now they're new to everyone else. But to you, these are things you've been living with for a while.
Yeah, in a way, it's quite odd to return to them, especially in the case of this record, because we made it mostly kind of between 20, like, from a production standpoint, between like shelved it for almost 2 years or a year and a half, like when I started putting up the singles last fall.
Okay.
And that was, in part because I had another release with Fire and Smoke. So I was on a separate release cycle with that group. And because so much of what I do is independent, I really can't, I have to be mindful of my capacity. So there was just no way that I could do, two sort of like full album cycles that were starting at the same time. So I was like, okay, great, I'm going to shelve this. Also, we've been working on it for so long that by the time I finished working on it, I was like, do I like this? Like, am I into this?
Yeah.
Did I make a good thing? Like, I needed the time and the space away from the record before getting ready to like, okay, like do the rest of the thing, like making all the assets and putting the music out and doing the PR campaigns and all of this stuff. So um it's interesting to me, especially with this collection of songs, because some of them go way back. Like some of them I've been playing live for a number of years, but they haven't been released and recorded before now. So there's songs like, songs that I started writing around like maybe even like 2013, 2014.
Wow. So that's old. Yeah,
And
that's a long time ago. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, it's a collection of songs that really spans, but I think that's what's so special about it for me is that, like when I'm older, I'm going to be able to look back at this record and be like, well, in so many ways, it's like, this is like the musical representation of my 20s.
Yeah. Sure.
Um,
Sure.
which feels quite special to me. But I had something else that I wanted to say, but I can't remember what. Yeah, it's
It's
gone. I've
okay. It's
lost
okay.
it.
I was going to ask, did you feel like now that these are recorded, do you feel like these are definitive versions of these songs? Or do you feel like you've gotten the best sort of version of these songs
Oh,
that you could? I'm assuming you're still going to play a lot of them live, and I'm sure like most people, you're probably never 100% satisfied with because you can always tweak it and change it and everything. But how do you feel sort of about these older songs, especially now that they exist in the world rather than just in your head?
yeah, sure. I mean, I feel like I feel liberated from these songs. That's what
Sure.
I keep saying in interviews. It's like, how do you feel? I'm like, oh, I feel liberated from this thing. Not because it was a bad, not because it was an objectively bad experience, but just because it was such a long tunnel,
Yeah.
from like starting to make the record to having it come out. So, I think with the songs, well, it's interesting because, as I'm not sure if you like picked up on this or not, but on the record, there are actually two new versions of existing songs that have been put out before. And one of them is the song Falling In from my first EP that I totally redid and rearranged because it was a song that had come out in 2013. And, now that's like a million years ago in music industry time. And, it was an arrangement that, I liked when I did it and I liked when I put it out when I was like, 19 or 20 years old or whatever. But,
Yeah.
but I felt like I hadn't totally squeezed all the juice out of it. So I totally rearranged it and I, put, um, a totally different instrumentation on it. And now it's like a dad rock song, So, and You Are Light as well, actually, was redone for the record. I had put out the Lucky Light acoustic session version of it. And then, but always with the intention that I was going to put it on the full length record eventually.
Right.
And that one's a really, really special one because it's very, very different from the acoustic sessions version, and it's a duet between Rihanna and myself, who produced the record. And it was a really special moment in the studio where we did very, very, very few takes of it, and the take that we took for the record, at the end of it, we knew both of us that that was the right one, and
That's
off
cool.
off it went basically. Yeah.
Cool, cool. So how can people hear this? I mean, at the time we're recording this, it's already out. People will hear this. It's a podcast. Someone could hear it the day this gets released, or they could hear it 5 years from now. Because apparently, I never stopped doing this show, so it'll be around. It'll be around for a while. So, what's the best way for someone to find your music? I mean, maybe by the time someone hears this, you have another record out. Who knows, right? So, what's the best way to find you online, I guess, and then hear what you have out there?
Sure. Yeah. The best way to find everything related to me is to go to my website, which is clairemorrison.com. That's Morrison, Morrison.
Cool. And then I assume that this is available on all the various platforms at this point that people
Oh,
consume music
yes.
these days.
Everywhere. And if you want to buy the record and have more of the money go to me than any of the streaming platforms who also sell my music, you can go to clairemorrison.bandcamp.com.
Cool. Yeah, Bandcamp's always the best one, I think. As a listener, I don't use the streaming, so I listen to physical stuff and then Bandcamp. That's pretty much it for me. So I get the appeal for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
awesome.
and then because it's a Winnipeg show, do you have anything coming up in the near future where you'll be back here playing any music?
Yeah, I'm starting sort of to finalize some dates from the summer, so nothing to announce yet, but very, very hopeful that soon I will have some Manitoba dates to announce.
Cool. And that'll be on the website, I guess, right?
You got it.
Awesome.